So I'm starting with the blue for some of the small hairs just up at the top of the ear here. As we come down, they get brighter and brighter, but I'm gonna first of all just lay in a little bit of colour for the hairs to go on top of. This is BE21. So this is the light grey pencil, not quite white yet. Pencils really do go on this paper really nicely. But I do find that I've got to sharpen them a little bit more often, especially in comparison to velour. I don't sharpen my pencils very often on that paper, but with the nature of this paper being a little bit like sandpaper, inevitably that's gonna blunt your pencils quite quickly. So I think I can come in with a bit of white at this point. This part of the ear is pretty bright. Now the hairs around this part are just so fine, that's why I'm tackling it with the white pencil. For other sections where I really want the white to shine out brightly, I'll still come back in with my soft pastel. And strengthen those areas with the softer pigment. So I'm just reshaping the ear a little bit, wasn't quite happy with that. So yeah, just be careful with your usage of pure white, because for example in this area where I've come in early with white, and now on this area up the ear, it's almost impossible for me to go any brighter in those areas now. I've kind of saturated them. I can clean them up if they get a bit of darker pigment on them, but that's pretty much as white as I can go. So if you do that too soon, with not enough of the other colors surrounding those areas, then you're just going to find that your whites look really dull in your paintings. So this is add or additional 31. Just getting some rough idea of the little hairs that fan around this area. So there are just so many little folds and ridges in the fur and on the ear. I'm really having to concentrate. So I'm not the chattiest in this first part actually. It's been tricky to figure out. I hope that's been interesting so far to watch along. I'm not always painting things that I'm really comfortable with. Sometimes things are new to me. And I may not constantly remember to shout out what colour I'm picking up. This is BE14. I'm hoping that by a certain point in the tutorial that you can start to see the colours that I'm using once I start repeating them a little bit. And just darkening down inside the ear a little bit again. We need the contrast. The last thing you want to lose is the contrast. So if your darks get a little bit washed out during the process, always come back in and brighten them up again. So the white pencil, the General's pencil, works pretty well over the top of all of that, which is good news because I'm going to use it to add a good bit of the detail in certain areas. So I can lean a little bit heavier with this on these smaller marks, and I'm getting a good definite mark from that. So this section is really quite bright, and the white General's pencil is dealing with that pretty well. I'm impressed with how bright that is. So by applying the A32 first, or A31 if you're working along with the animal set, that's given me a little bit of a base coat to add the white hairs on top of. And then hopefully these white hairs will shine out on top of that. So I'm just looking at the pattern, how the hairs come around in a little fan. And of course I can always come back in here as well with a little bit of brown pastel pencil, just to try and heighten some of the contrast again in between those lines. Not everything has to be done just in one direction, so not necessarily just from dark to light. These adjustments are ongoing throughout the whole process. So yeah, I think that bit looks pretty good. So let's try and get a little bit more light and shade around the ear while I'm here. I'm thinking there's going to be some sacrifice on detail made in this painting. First experience working on fur on this paper, and I'm definitely finding it quite tricky to get the definition and the marks how I normally want them, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because sometimes that leads you to do things a little bit differently. So this is A19, just finding a little bit of the light around this second layer to the ear here. So I'm just looking for the little edge to the ear. I'm using this light, sort of a flesh tone of pencil. This is one of my Faber-Castells, so a peachy pink colour. It's a strange little colour. I pick it up in all sorts of projects, whether it's a people portrait or an animal. It pops up in a lot of places, a useful colour to have. So yeah, it's in parts like this where it's quite difficult to not let the pastel pick up some of that dark pigment around it, and then it all kind of muddies together. So I'm just continuing to put the pigment down even though it's a bit of a mess, and then hopefully come in with some pastel pencil and neaten that up. Yeah, it's really tricky not to lift the pigment that you're trying to put down. Much harder to get it to go on cleanly. But there's clearly a technique to that on this paper. It's just a paper that I haven't used for this particular effect before, so it's interesting to see how it reacts differently to this type of layering. So I think I have to be more sparing with the amount of pastel that I put on. Careful to not oversaturate the paper. But I like how it's going so far. It's just tricky. So there's often those stages that you've got to get through before your piece starts to show any kind of hope. And I often call them the ugly stages. I think we all go through them. And I think what separates most professional artists from a lot of amateur or hobby artists is perhaps the need to get a thing finished. I find that quite often it's deadlines that keep me on track. Sometimes needs must is a, I can't remember what the saying is it needs must is a great mistress, or anyway, you get the point. When you've got to do something, and that can include when you're earning a living from it, for example, then sometimes that really motivates you. So you've got to find a way to motivate yourself through the difficult stages, because it's not a lot of fun to sit down at a painting that isn't quite working yet. It's much more fun to sit down at a painting that you're halfway through and it's going really well and you're really enjoying it. So it's hard to sometimes get through the ugly stage and out the other side, but I feel like I'm getting somewhere. I'm liking this section of this ear so far. So I'm just going to keep working on. Bits that I don't like I can come back to later, but if I can get everything a little bit more worked or blocked in, because I've still got a lot to finish in this area, Still got stuff to finish up this ear. I've really finished nothing. I have jumped about the piece since I started, really. So if you're working along, good luck with that. I don't normally jump around this much, but it's just that type of piece where I'm really having to figure it out. So I think I've got this ear starting to look a lot better, but I just start to get bored when I'm working on any one place for a long time. So I'm going to finish off quickly, hopefully, this ear, and then I'd like to define this edge of the face. The edges are so important, and I'm slowly working my way in towards this focal point here in the middle. So I'd like to get this edge defined a little better. So I'll start at the top here and work on this ear a little bit more. I'm seeing a lot of similarities between the Fisher 400 and Pastel Matte for sure. There's a lot that can be done afterwards to create more texture with the blenders, or I'm probably going to use some of the soft blenders a bit more to create the texture. So I've picked up BE21. There's a little patch of shadow just on the ear, so that's why I'm going for darker colors towards the top here. And it's similar to Pastel Matte in that you really need to give your marks a bit of a soften into the paper, otherwise everything can look a little bit harsh. So perhaps I might also pick up a little bit of BE23, that lovely plum purple colour that I used on the inside of the other ear. Maybe that would be good as well in some of the shadows. Quite often in the shadows on this colour of an animal, I might go for darker purples. If you've seen my recent tiger tutorial, I used a lot of dark purple in that. But the ferret fox is an unusual colour. It's not quite orange tan colours like tigers, for example. It's a very unusual colour. What it reminds me of is certain Pomeranian dogs, or sometimes you'll get a Chihuahua this colour. I've painted dogs this colour before, and that's one of the reasons I love teaching how to paint fur using dogs a lot of the time, because you get such variety in the colours of dogs. Variety also in the texture of the furs. There are a few things that you don't encounter. So yeah, I'm liking this BE23 just for a little bit in the shadow areas. And then I'm also going to bring out a little bit of the dark colour, hopefully again up the ear here. I can use this blender just to pick out some of that darker undertone again, hopefully, if I've put enough of the dark down to begin with. But you can at least use this tool to get a more fur-like texture in places. And this one is falling apart. I've used it a lot. You can change the little sponges on the top, and that's what I need to do, but I've kept this one alive because it's already so dark and dirty that I can use it for jobs like that instead of sacrificing a nice clean one for this. So that definitely helps with the texture and the difference between light and shade on the ear. It's just so subtle. We kind of come out into the sunlight around the tip of the ear, but these in between areas, it's quite difficult to tell what's going on in terms of light and shade. It's very subtle. There isn't like one sharp line of shadow. Like if you look at the leg, the front of this leg in the photo reference, you can see the sharp line between shadow and light. And up here it's much more subtle, and that's always a bit trickier to achieve. But I think that's the way to go with this paper, to really try and coax the texture of the fur out of the paper. It's tricky. I am finding this difficult, and that's mainly because of the paper choice, I think. I have heard some of you guys also talking about difficulties in creating fur on Fisher 400, so this is interesting for me to try it and see for myself. So if you're working along on a different paper, maybe you're having a slightly easier time, but that's just the thing with a new paper. You expect to take a little bit of time to get a feel for it, and as I said, I hadn't tried fur on this before, so this is a bit of a learning curve for me too. So I'm going to come down the face a little bit more and try and get this outline of the face starting to appear, because I think that's going to help me overall. So I'm going to start by getting some of the creases, some of the area that's just behind the face, so really working on down behind the face here. So I pick up BE6. I can use the BE6 just in the background to kind of outline down the nose. And then we've got a lovely dark crease just running up here, which gives us that required darkness to really make the little face pop out from this. And then underneath the nose here is extremely dark. So hopefully I've still got enough tooth on the paper there to really work the shape of the little tip of the nose, as I'd like to get that. It's a real focal point of this piece, I feel. I do like an animal portrait that doesn't have open eyes. There's something so nice about the sleeping pose, because sometimes the eyes get a lot of the attention in a portrait, and this type of picture really makes you take in everything else, the lovely textures of the fur and the other features too, which often get a bit overlooked. So that little nose is probably quite important in this. I hope I've got enough tooth left on the paper to tackle that later. So this is NE1, a very useful colour in this portrait. I can see a lot of this colour running through it. So it's hard actually to tell what's going on in this little area. And this is important because it's forming the shape of the other side of the head here, so it's very important. I'm just having a good look at the photo reference to see where these vertical lines come down to, because they're kind of important in the structure of the face on this side. But of course we dip into the shadows here as well, so have to consider using more like the grey 8 colour or my additional colour. So at the minute I'm just trying to block in these general shapes that are running behind the face. And I believe that this part that I'm starting now is part of the face. This is where the face starts. And this is also part of the face. So sometimes it takes a little bit of really looking at the photo reference to figure out what's going on, because you really need to understand what's going on in the photo reference to be able to capture all of the structures within the painting. So spend time just looking. And then of course we come around sort of into the sunlight again at a certain point. All of these little edges over here are very subtle, which makes them easy to miss. But this one in particular, where we're working on this part of the face, is so important because we're going between light and shade. We're also switching between the head and the body, somewhere hidden in there, so it's tricky to see. So I don't want to continue on too much further on the body, as I'm going to come back to that once I get the face finished. Just the parts that are really important to creating the structure of the face here. So where this white comes in, we've got a kind of ridge that runs up in a curved line here. So this is pure white. This is probably one of the brightest parts of the painting up here. And I can come back in at the end and really brighten certain areas just to enhance it again. But it helps just to get a little bit more of it locked in at this stage, just to help me see this outer edge of the face. This is BE21. Another very useful shadow area colour. But this is really the line here that there's a certain level of importance to, and that's what I'm really focusing on at the moment to try and get, because I think this is the other brow. So as we come along this brow here, I think that's that one continuing on the other side of the face. So it's a tricky enough angle of the face, not quite full side profile. You've got a little hint of the other side of the face here, so it's more like a 3/4 profile. Which is always tricky. So this is RE9. BE14. Because again, on this side, those little ridges all become very important to the overall structure that we're seeing. So this is the point where you really want your original sketch to be reasonably accurate before you start. I don't like having to mess around with the proportions at this stage. I'm hoping that as I go around searching through all of these little ridges and eventually filling in all the gaps, that I've got my original sketch reasonably accurate and I'm not finding any gaps or that things aren't fitting in even though it's in the photo reference. That can definitely happen. The brown pencil is also very useful. So now we're coming into this area on the face. There's a lot of structural work to do with all these little ridges. I've kind of come around the corner here to this main deep ridge just at the base of the ear, And then we've got another little one that comes across, because as I'm working I'm kind of losing my outlines as well. So to just quickly sketch back in a few shapes here is going to help me proceed. So don't be afraid to stop and do that. I've got the brown pencil in my hand at the minute. Just useful to get some of those structural elements back in the picture. And gives me yet another chance just to make sure that all my proportions are adding up here on the face in this section. It's not too late to make some further adjustments. I just hope I don't have to. So the brown pencil is a good one to do this with, because there's a dark brown undertone to most of these areas that I'm sketching in right now. So I'm going to need to apply some dark brown anyway. So although I use the black pencil a lot to sketch out initially, it can disappear into the paper completely, because you can see that I'm also losing this area that I'm leaning on, but it doesn't matter, I can still see the general shapes. I can sketch it back in as I go. But as you're working, try to pick up a colour of pencil that's going to make sense in what you're sketching. So if you don't need black in there, then don't continue to sketch it out or use black on the lower layer. But your black lines initially aren't a problem to get rid of. And this is why I don't actually put the grid on directly onto the paper, because it's just some difficult lines to get rid of. And I am actually noticing that I want to change the curve of this line so that it's lower and it comes down just above this line. So it's still not too late, or perhaps I've just lost my line there a little bit. You can still make adjustments like this before going on. And hopefully as I work round from here, my thinking is that I will eventually make it round to where I left off on the ear. And that will be nice, to close a gap somewhere and see what we're left with, because I haven't really managed to finish too many areas that I've been working on. I've had to sort of move around a little bit more. So yeah, on this section we're kind of in the shadows here. I'm seeing a lot of this dark brown through the lighter fine hairs right around this section, so it does no harm to get this first layer in with the pencil. And even the pencil rubs into this paper pretty well, so I just want to give that all a nice light rub into the paper. So I'm going to pick up some grey 8. We're right in the shadows in some of these areas. I am going to need some warmer colours through this as well though. So this, I'm not sure if I've picked it up already, a lighter brown pastel pencil. It's number 283 from Faber-Castell. Sort of like a dark caramel colour. So there are certain colours of pastel pencil that I seem to go for often. It's a given that I'm going to maybe need a couple of shades of brown, a light and a dark, a black and a white usually, and then we branch out into other maybe light greys, blue. Off-whites are always useful in both your soft pastels and your pastel pencils. And of course this flesh tone, this number is 189. It's also a pencil that I pick up often, and as you can imagine it's quite useful in people portraits too. And it's proving quite useful within the shadow areas because it's not got as much heat to it as the likes of the BE9 or even my BE14 that I've been picking up. Now they're quite muted colours, but there's just more warmth to this. This is a little bit more muted. And then this would be the light grey colour that I often pick up. But yeah, the pencils are definitely useful on this. The paper accepts pencil really well, so it makes sense that you can do the final bit of adjustment on certain areas. I mean, the areas that I'll spend the most time on are the ones that I see as pretty important. So anything that deals with the structure, the overall structure of the animal, I deem that pretty important. So it's worth spending a bit of extra time on those parts. And I suppose it makes sense that the pastel pencils should work really well on this paper in comparison to some, because by nature it is like a sandpaper. So you're literally sanding your pencils and you're leaving more pigment on the paper. So if you like using the pastel pencils more, you would probably enjoy some of the sanded surfaces because you're going to get more strength from your marks, I think. At least that's what I'm noticing. Because quite often this colour, this light cream colour, doesn't go on many papers too well, and I'm finding it's going on pretty well on this. So like with every paper, there are pros and cons. And it can really depend on the subject matter that you happen to be painting. So yeah, give paper a chance. Your first impression may not be an accurate representation of how the paper is to work on, because quite often you have a horrible time doing something for the first time on a new paper. So we've got really fine hairs. We're back to the ear again. We've come full circle around the head there. But I did get this area refined a bit more, and I'm happy with how this is going. So I'm fine with joining this gap. Let's get around one section of this. Now, as we come around out of the shadow, I'll switch to the white pencil. And I also want to add a bit of warmth in here too. So this is BE14. So it helps to get a lot of that in there first. So this white pencil does magically show up on top of all of that. And that's quite a lot of layers underneath there. And you get really nice fine lines from this. I probably could do with stopping to sharpen it a bit for doing these particular hairs. And then just helping with some of those hairs that come down over the top. And hoping that that creates the sense of the ridge that's in there. that we start to see the ridge. I can come back in with dark again, redefine some of the dark lines running down through this. There's still loads of room on the paper to work with the pencil. So unless you're going to be particularly bold and painterly with the sticks, I think a good technique with this particular paper, if you're trying to get fur that's as complicated as this one, is some of the time you can make use of some of the pastel pencils to get those extra details. Painterly is great. I've enjoyed this paper for other things, but in this case, when there's just so much lovely detail in the fur, it's hard to resist adding some of it at least. I am having to simplify what I see though, because the detail in this is just immense. So any one there. I'm also going to come in perhaps with the dark brown. I was going to with the black, but perhaps the dark brown first, just to strengthen this divide. So we've also got these subtle little ridges that run around the bottom of the base of the ear. I'm picking up my additional colour first. I can help this with the pastel pencil after. But I really want to try and get some idea of the ridges with the soft pastel. And it's difficult with a bigger stick, of course, but you can kind of aim it in the right direction. And there's a very prominent dark area. It makes a very definite shape, so I'll be working at that part, I'm sure. So you're really looking for the prominent shapes all the time. They are what helps you plot everything in the right place. So this light, kind of a lilac tinted grey, I use this kind of colour all the time. Again, it's another off-white. It's a way to paint a white area that's not quite lit so that it looks pure white. It's not a million miles off my light grey pencil that I'm using, but there's more of a colour to this. If you can see on camera, this is more monochrome. This has a slight purple or lilac tint to it, but I can certainly use this pencil to help shape that better, add a little bit more detail. And I am going to need some white as well. It does come round into brightness. Now this shadow here is pretty dark, so I also want to add a little bit of warmth in there, but I'm going to come in with some brown pastel pencil here and just shape this a little better before coming in with the white highlights on this section. Just looking for all the darkest little areas, especially around where this joins on. So perhaps time for a bit of white pastel pencil. So just try to be sparing with it. Just look for the areas that are really being hit by bright white. Even as it comes round the corner here on this ridge. And we kind of come into the light grey instead. Now those ridges do continue around the corner, and then we're into what's going on the neck, which is a whole other set of ruffles. I'd be happy to hear. But I'm not going to continue on around there at the minute. I just want to get this area worked so that I can get down towards the face. And we're finally down into the next little ridge. I'm using the light grey first of all because I can come in with the white over the top of this. But there's quite a lot of this that is more muted than bright white. And because the pencils are working so nicely, I'm just going to continue to do that. This area is just covered in little fine lines, so I'm not going to struggle with the bigger sticks. This is exactly where I need my sharper edges, and I'll even come into some blue in this area perhaps, if I've gone dark enough with the brown over here. May just be a bit too dark to show up. Okay, I'm gonna stop and sharpen this. It's become impossible to get a sharp edge. Okay, sharp pencil again. And when it's super sharp, I just have to be careful that I don't break it. And I normally break it right after saying things like that, so I'm going to be extra careful. So this is also where I can go back over and overlap the edges a little bit more. So that's really starting to take shape. Any area that's got difficult layering like this is going to take you a little bit more time, so just take your time on areas like that. So I think I can continue down this front central part of the face now. Again, the brown pencil is good for getting some of these darker areas in, and for helping me plot out what's going on in the fur. Now the eye is going to be probably quite simple to do because of course there's no open eye to deal with. What's important in this case is all of the fur surrounding this, creating the shape of the eyebrow. Everything else becomes really important. So I'm just getting the eye blocked in there. BE6. It's quite a similar colour to the brown pencil that I was using, but it's so much more rich and warm than the pencil. So I can start to think of the face now, block in some of the colours on here. I feel like I should speed up at this point a little bit just because I've got a lot of the hard work done in figuring out the colour order to use to capture certain parts. So this is NE1. I'm just looking at the structure on the bulge of the front of the forehead here. This is A27. So I'm using my additional colour to come right down the nose. It doesn't matter if I make a bit of a mess of that because I'm going to come in with the pastel pencil. This is with the brown pencil, perhaps with the lighter brown would be enough. And from the other side as well, shape that outline again. It's getting darker as we get down towards the nose. So it's such an important little structural area, this just on the bridge of the nose. I'm really measuring everything in comparison to everything around it. So I want to get a bit more warmth laid down on the face before coming in with any kind of detail anywhere. We've got a lot of shadow underneath here, underneath the chin. But this shadow underneath the chin is actually shining with a lot of warmth. It's kind of reflecting the warm colours of the fox. And I suppose of the ground below as well. This is BE9. We've also got a lot of warm colours on the face though. There's a lovely amount of sunlight actually shining on the face, which is nice. This little guy was really enjoying the sun this day. Too lazy to get up and do much posing, but I liked the sleepy posing anyway. NE1, there's quite a lot of this in around the corner of the eye. This is BE14. Again, parts of the face do dip into shadow, and I'm really trying to replicate that. So I'm going to use this additional colour to add the highlights in certain areas. So now I can really focus on this whole area surrounding the eye and try and bring a bit more life into the piece. And of course whatever I put down with the big sticks, I can neaten it up with the pastel pencil. So it's really just a matter of working each little ridge. And come in with the pastel pencil just when you feel you need to, when you need that smaller point precision. But give it a go with the big sticks if you haven't before. Try and do as much of the detail as you can manage with the bigger sticks. You'll get some marks that you don't want, but after time you will get more of a feel for it. So when you compare down this part of the front of the muzzle, coming down towards the nose, when you compare that with the brightest white area, here for example on the ear, this is actually much more muted, so I'm coming in with the additional colour. This is add 31 from the animal set. So just starting to get the face blocked in a little bit more. I do want to add a little bit of brighter highlight just down the outer line of the nose, if I can manage to do that with the soft pastel. And some of this area just on the side of the muzzle is also pretty bright white. Just coming round to the nose. So the marks on the face are particularly small. We're into little tiny short hairs here. I can do a lot of this with the pastel pencils just to get those hairs short enough. So I can darken this dark slit here for the eye again. I can start to really work the little hairs around it. So this light grey colour pencil, definitely one of my most often used. Very handy, brightest highlight colour in areas that aren't being lit for it to be bright white. Now when I come through this with the white, I'm being really sparing with it. The white is just catching some little hairs here and there. Mostly towards the ends, hanging over the next little ridge, places like that. And the same in other places. Just be really sparing with the white. So now I can come back through areas like this, add some little punches of colour using the soft pastel. You can just as easily go back over pastel penciled areas with your soft pastel sticks. Whatever order you need to layer this up to get the desired effect is completely okay. So far the face looks very cold. All the colours don't have a lot of warmth to them. And also certain parts up the ear here, there's just something overall very cold about it. So I'm going to bring in some A7, see if I can go through these marks and add a bit of yellow warmth to this overall. So I'm not worried about losing definition. In fact, I feel like it's gone a little bit too defined at this stage. And I've come in a lot with the white pencil simply because it's been difficult to get the detail with the bigger sticks. But now that I've got a bit of detail in here, I can certainly dot a bit of colour over this. And try to warm it up a bit. I can get reasonably small marks with the big sticks, and it almost helps having the channels there that I made with the pastel pencil. It's quite easy to follow those marks. So I've even switched to BE14. And perhaps go a little bit darker with BE9. So yeah, I just think it's missing a lot of the warmth. I'm not really getting a sense of the light and shade yet. But it's good that I got all of those cool colours down first, because they are going to really shine through in the shadow parts. So it's much easier to adjust the colors and make more interesting marks once you've got some sense of the structure already in. So hopefully I can bring this around. But that already starts to look a bit better. Really just lacking in the warmer brown tones overall. So this is A7. Again, bringing some warmth into it. Just having the cold white and also my additional light lilac colour as the main highlights leaves it all looking a bit cold. It's got such a warm glow. Making the tiniest dots I can make on this section of the face where the hair is at its absolute shortest. So it's true that I've lost a bit of the definition in the marks, but to me this already looks more fur-like. Sometimes having too much definition doesn't quite look real. So I think it might help to get the nose in at this stage. And then I can sort of work the face as a whole. So there's not really a lot that we can see of the nose. And there will be a little bit involved in shaping the nose when I've got the rest of the fur around it, behind. So I'm just dotting on a little bit of grey 8 and BE6. And then just right on the tip of the nose, I'm using BE9 here, surrounding areas and also on the little tip, which I can then shape with some pencil from the other side. So we have some light hair just behind the nose, which is going to really help that stand out.